So it just amazed me about the lack of knowledge out there because it was something I'd grown up with. I always felt so comfortable with it.
Mhm.
And then the lack of knowledge from other people was like, actually, we need to do something about this. So that's what drew me into, the advocacy and the education.
Hi, I'm Cian Xiao.
And I'm Sammy Winemaker. We talk about ways to put the human back at the center of care.
The Waiting Room Revolution starts right now. Welcome back to the Waiting Room Revolution. Today, I'm so excited to welcome Bec Lyons onto our show. She is from Tasmania, Australia. She is a funeral director, but oh, so much more. She is a leader in home funeral services across all of Australia. She's a doula, she's an advocate, she is a Churchill Fellow. We're going to learn so much about funerals, but also dying, natural dying, and lots more. So Bec, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I wanted to start with a little bit, so our audience gets to know you a bit better, because I had the great pleasure of meeting you at a random dinner by happenstance at the Public Health Palliative Care International Conference. We were just meeting, you were across from me, and we just had this amazing conversation. I learned so much. And so at that time, you've said it on social media too about how death has always been a part of your life. So maybe you can explain that a little bit and who you are and what draws you to this work.
It's really interesting because when I was working in the funeral industry, I was meeting all of these people who would like walk through the door of a funeral home and go, no one's ever died before. What do we do? Like we don't know what's possible. We don't know what to ask. And it used to floor me because I'm someone who has had death in my life for almost as long as I can remember. I had, these encounters with animals when I was a child. And, I remember being a very young child and my parents opening the door one night to a knock on a rainy night and a man standing there holding my cat. And I remember the reaction I had to him, which wasn't great. He must have felt terrible, but I was a child. But then, when I was 8, my grandfather, who I lived with and loved dearly, disappeared from my life essentially because in those days, the thinking was that death really wasn't a place for children in white
Mm.
Western culture. And so no one ever thought to tell me that he was sick or that he was dying. And he was just there one day and he wasn't the next. And I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral. And so I had like all of these experiences as a young person. And then I got into my teenage years and I had my a friend suicide and my aunt suicided and my uncle asked for me at his deathbed. And so all the way along, all of my growing up, I had death in my life. So the people that didn't, who would get to like 50 or 60 years old and walk through the door of a funeral home going, no one's ever died before. I'd be like, how? How is that and so it just amazed me about the lack of knowledge out there because it was something I'd grown up with. I always felt so comfortable with it.
Mhm.
And then the lack of knowledge from other people was like, actually, we need to do something about this. So that's what drew me into, the advocacy and the education.
So would I be right in saying you run a home funeral service and you are a funeral director? I think people might not. I would love to hear how you describe what you do as a funeral director.
It's a tricky one. I am a funeral director and I also do, the good part of the mortuary work, and I am an end of life doula as well. So I will often work with people before they die and help them, along that path. I that's we call it end of life services. So we have a gamut of different things. It's not just funeral. But yes, I am the same as the other funeral directors in town. I'm just very, very different.
Well, no, I love that you talk about um, how your role as a doula goes upstream, and we'll get into that in later in the show, which is all about what the waiting room revolution is about. But I remember I was so fascinated when we spoke over that dinner because you were telling me that there are many different ways to deal with the body, and I've only ever known of, being buried in a coffin or cremation. But in fact, what I learned from you is there are many different ways to do it more naturally, or different options that people may not know about. So are you able to share a little bit about some of the strategies or options that people had that that aren't just so traditional?
Yeah, so and look, some of them are actually by definition really traditional because it's how things used to be. But everything from being able to keep the person's body at home and care for them yourself, like everyone has the ability to do that in some capacity, you know, manner of death pending, but most people can do that. But also when you talk about burial and cremation, we've only really had these binary options for, you know, 100 years or more. There's there's also natural burial. There's alkaline hydrolysis, which has entered the market in a lot of places now, so water cremation. There's natural organic reduction, which is happening in America now, and big movements in Australia to bring that here as well. There's various different ways you can look at doing what the industry term body disposal, but also various ways of caring for and being with the body of your person as well.
Yeah, and I think you kind of talked a little bit about that um in your TEDx talk, which where you talk about reimagining what a funeral uh, is supposed to do, how we do it, and of course, what some of the outcomes could be. So I don't know. I'd love to hear a little bit about some of those thoughts because spoke so eloquently about. I really think people um, ca haven't thought of how we could reimagine what you're just sort of talking about, the being with the body and this whole. I know you use the word funeral, but it's more. A funeral isn't just this building where you say goodbye. It could be a whole process.
100%. And this is where I think we actually have to redefine the funeral. I think that a funeral in our, Western world has become 2 hours in a chapel with three pieces of music and a booklet, a cup of tea afterwards, 30 photos, pick two readings, have a celebrant, and we'll see you at, 2 o'clock on Friday. But I I think it's so much more than that. The ceremony and funeral is all we get to weave our grief and bereavement around, and the whole point of ceremony is to make us okay to live on without the presence of that person in our lives. And so it's a super important thing, and we've priced people out of it. And if you look at, the rising costs of what is a funeral these days and the amount of people who are looking at, dying in the next 30 years, it's no wonder complicated grief is now part of the DSM-5 because we're not supporting people in their grief, in what they need, and that's what ritual and ceremony is supposed to do. So by redefining funeral can be everything from making sure dad had his favorite boots on and you did that for him, making sure that, grandma's hair is curled the right way, making sure that, for my mum, it was the, I wanted the book that she stole from Auburn Girls High School in 1974, her favorite book in the whole world, went with her. Like, so there are all of these things, and they're all acts of service, right?
Mm.
And we know that grief can be better when the last thing you do for your person is an act of service. And so by creating the space for families and communities to do what feels right when it feels right, they are doing the acts of service, and they can actually become that. All of that can become the funeral. A funeral can be just as much beers in the backyard around a fire or a barbecue, or having a cup of tea and a scone at grandma's favorite cafe and sharing a few stories. Like a funeral can be anything. And I think I said in that thing, like for us, it was every day we spent with them, and it was every thing we did for them. Like, that was all part of our funeral and ceremony, and that's the stuff that will hold people. That's
Yeah.
the stuff that lets you move on and live on and feel a sense of peace because I did that for them.
Yeah. You also talked about what people expect the outcomes of a funeral to be and how we really should go broader than sort of the traditional thought. So can you speak a little bit more of what, people with an old, maybe an outdated view of what a funeral is and does, and what you imagine and what you've seen it to be?
Yeah, I've seen funerals become the most incredible community bonding experiences. And when you engage family and community in death care for the person, and it doesn't necessarily have to mean hours and hours or days and days, or doesn't necessarily have to be the messy stuff, but some form of caring for the dead. Like, when you bring people together to wash and dress a body, or to spend time in vigil, or whatever that is,
Mhm.
you create these networks of care around that experience because it's a shared, beautiful, and in these days, unique thing, right? And so you create these networks of people that don't go away. And we think of a funeral these days as a very defined event. It's a couple of hours, you turn up, you listen to some words, you probably learn a few things about the person, but then everyone goes away, everyone goes home, everyone goes back to work. When you do funeral differently and you go, let's incorporate elements of giving or time, or let's all do the thing where we write messages on a coffin, or we all give something to the person, or we all, like, when we connect differently around the space of funeral, the bonds that get created in that space can be very different, and people don't just go away. They don't just leave and not talk to you for 6 months, because it's sharing something really, really beautiful.
Hmm. Yeah, I can see how like it's more like a process and a shared experience rather than sort of like, watching a movie where it's passive. It's more active, maybe.
I
Yeah.
think funerals have become very passive now, and I think it's probably a product of corporatization and capitalism and industry and all of that stuff, and I don't know that. I think that has its place, and I think that my whole thing about funerals is that people should be making informed choices. They should know all of the options that are out there and then choose what's right for them. And I think the industry and what that offers has a very valid place. It's just not the only choice.
Absolutely. And one of the amazing things that I learned about you is you completed a Churchill Fellowship and you traveled around the world to learn about different countries and cultures and how they do death practices differently. And so I'd love to hear about some of the places you went and some of the different cultural practices around death and dying, because I mean, from Canada, and I know you're in Australia, Tasmania, we have a very white, maybe Eurocentric view of, and maybe like you said, in the last 100 years, sort of capitalist, maybe funeral vision. But like you sort of alluded to, there are cultures that have been around for thousands of years that maybe do it differently. So be so curious to what did you learn, and where are some of the countries and practices you saw and witnessed?
So the Churchill was done in two parts. So it was one lot of travel, but I sort of had two focuses, which was a bit unusual for a Churchill. But I was looking at the human relationship to death and ceremony, but also different body disposal technologies and approaches to that. And so I sort of jumped around from place to place. And the other thing about a Churchill is that it's got to be translatable to the Australian environment. So there are plenty of other places around the world that have gorgeous practices as well, but not directly translatable to Australia. So
Sure.
one of the places that I did visit though was Mexico. And I was down in Oaxaca for the Dia de los Muertos Day of the Dead, it's known as the week there. It's actually there's 3 main days, but, I mean, the celebrations go for about a week, and I was very, very lucky to be invited into people's homes and into their cemeteries to meet their ancestors, to go grave cleaning with them, and really learn and hear about the connections they keep to the dead.
Mm.
And so funerals, at least in Oaxaca, were very, very quick. They happened very quickly. So when and in some of those villages, there's not refrigeration or anything like that. So, someone dies and the church bells get rung and everyone knows within a couple of hours, and people start arriving at the house and the band sets up outside, and there's people who come and do prayers for the dead. And even that, you start your training when you're in your 40s to if you're going to be that person in a village, and by the time you're about 60, you're probably ready to do it on your own.
Ah.
And and so they come and they do these prayers and they help prepare the person's body with the family. That person's body will stay overnight in the home, sometimes 2 nights, but not often. While all of this is going on, someone's gone and dug the grave, someone's notified the priest. And so, the next day they'll carry the person to the church, then they'll carry them to the cemetery. They will all do the burial themselves. But the social system around that is that 9 days later, they get together again
Mm.
and they do the procession again. And then I think it's 40 days after that, they get together again. And so there's all of these customs built into society for people to look after people, for networks to be built, for the gathering to happen. These are things we don't see in
Mhm.
Australia. We get 2 days bereavement leave and then it's like back to work, dude. So there are places that are doing it really beautifully and holding each other in this kind of liminal time of grief. The grief's really interesting in Sweden too. So it used to be 60 days, now I think it's 30 days, but it's really not unusual for there to be a long time between death and funeral. And it's seen that there's a period of mourning, and that if you're in that period, it's okay if you're going to burst into tears at work and excuse yourself. It's okay. Like there's social, in the social fabric, there is stuff that is okay because we acknowledge that grief and sadness and death is a part of life.
Yeah.
And that's something we don't really have here in Australia either. I don't know what it's like there, but it's like, oh, that's a bit awkward, or don't mention their name, or it's a bit uncomfortable. And that's a shame, I think.
Mm-hmm. I know that you put instead of a report at the end of this year-long fellowship, you wrote a book, A Heartfelt Undertaking, and that was sort of a summary of the results and implications and the things you've learned. Um, if people checked out that book or hearing more, where are some of the other places you went to besides Mexico and that sort of also stick out in your mind as practices that we could learn from that are applicable for Australia?
The Czech Republic was amazing. So the Czech Republic, I was there just before their 30-year anniversary of the Velvet Revolution, so the fall of communism. And the way that people are reclaiming ceremony there is fascinating. Some of the things that are happening in America are also fascinating at the moment. They've got I went to visit the only secular outdoor volunteer run funeral pyre, outdoor cremation
Oh,
facility. Uh, and that town is just phenomenal. Like,
where was that
it's got
located?
it's in Crestone, Colorado, 7,500 feet uh, above sea level in the Colorado Rocky Mountains. It is divine. and the town is amazing. It's such a diverse community in a town of, like, I think there's 160, 170 people in the town. There's about 1,600 people, or there was when I was there, in the district. And there's like 60 art studios, and they've got their own like newspaper, and it's just the most the capacity in that community is something else. And they do their own cremations. They cremate each other when people die. Like,
And it's outside and they just
it's outside, it's a pyre, yeah. So there are
okay.
some stunning things happening.
Yeah, and what do you think, talking and learning from them, like what led them to do it that way as opposed to, I don't know, the maybe the more traditional way, I'll say.
Well, you need to understand a little bit about the town. Like, the town was founded on philanthropy, and
Okay.
it was a couple of people who were gonna, you know, create this place for retirees and make a whole lot of money, and then they realized that wasn't gonna work, and then one of them was told about a prophecy that, like a Native American prophecy, that people would be united, the faiths would be united in that space, and so they didn't quite believe it at the start, and yada yada yada. They did all this research and they found out that it was probably a real thing, and so they packaged up all of this land and gave it away.
Oh,
And so around the town, you've got like Buddhist retreats and Indian ashrams, and there's a monastery, like Christian monastery, and there's all of these different religious groups who come together and have their retreats in this space. And and so it was always going to be a little bit unusual, I suppose. But being that, like, one of there was a monk, a Tibetan monk, I think he was, and he'd said to his friend, "When I die, I want to be burnt outdoors. I want a pyre." And his friend went, "Oh yeah, we could probably do that." And he built this kind of structure on the back, a portable structure on the back of a trailer, and just did it. And then he did another couple, and then some people in the town went, should probably put some structure around this. And so they went down the route of getting everything established, and so that's, that's how they do it,
the one Tibetan monk started a whole movement, really
right? It
amazing.
always takes someone with a little bit of a harebrained idea, doesn't it?
Well, but that people caught on and they wanted to do it differently. I mean, you
Yeah.
mentioned how half of the church fellowship was focused on like ritual and the human connection to that ritual. And so, separate from like the practices of how, you use the word body disposal, what did you learn about our connection to this ritual? Have we lost it? And what was universal? Is there something that's universal across countries and cultures?
I think what I find universal is the acts of service.
Mm,
Like, you call it different things, and there's a multitude of different ways of getting to that point, but I think the universal thing I see is that people are better when they've done something for their person, even if it's putting a flower on a coffin, or
mm,
like, even if it's the smallest of gestures can mean the most. And that's not language or race or ethnicity specific. It is just human connection.
mhm,
And yeah, it's the idea that you walk away with a little bit of peace to go, like, because everything's got to make it okay for you to get in your car and drive away.
mhm.
And and the thing that does that for people is just it felt okay. It might have been a crap time, but I did that for someone. And I hear that echoed in many countries. It's the doing.
The doing, yeah. Well, I mean, what makes you also unique is the fact that you're a doula, and you mentioned that earlier in the program, and how we've talked a lot about, you know, the death and the ritual around that. But I'm so curious about your experiences meeting patients and families before they die, and how they find you, what your relationship is like, and the role you play well before a death happens.
Yeah, and it's quite varied. So I meet people who are well, fit, healthy, and well, and just want to do planning. So I'll do like advanced care planning with them. I'll do enduring guardian, power of attorney, and get all of the paperwork, draw up a funeral plan, so people feel like they've got all their ducks in a row.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And then sometimes I meet people who have a terminal or a life-limiting illness, and sometimes they just want troubleshooting. They want to know what's coming.
mm-hmm.
They want to know what I can do and when I'm best to come into that picture. Some people want me there from that moment, and I'll sort of stay and journey with them. But I guess sitting with someone who knows their death is imminent, it's a very different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And often people are relieved to talk about it with a third party, someone who's not emotionally invested in it,
Mm-hmm.
and someone who's not coming at it from a purely medical point of view either. I think that's the other really big point, is that as a doula, I go in as a non-medical presence. So I don't have an opinion about, treatments and illness trajectories and all of that sort of stuff. I just show up for wherever the person is at.
Yeah, the emotional, psychological, social parts of it, which are, honestly, a huge, well overlooked part of how individuals and their families manage and cope. It's where they struggle the most, really, is trying to understand how all of the impacts of that. And what is like have you found it more people more receptive to doulas? I mean, we've had a few end of life doulas on our show before. Never a funeral director, so you are our first who's a dual. But the do you think there's more receptivity to doulas? And I know you also have a role nationally, advocating for doulas across Australia and what that has been like. Yeah.
I am finding that more and more people are warming to the idea. I think the public, when they know about it, there's not even it's straight from like cold to hot. People are very okay with it. I think the warming is what we're doing with the medical communities.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of skepticism,
Hmm.
in some of those camps, but I find nurses, for the most part, really jump on it, because nurses are understaffed and there's not enough of them. They're under-resourced, and so we get to fill a role that people need, that they don't have time for. So I think nurses see the value much quicker than, other people in that space. But there are doulas down here in Tassie who are working full time as doulas, and knocking work back and farming work out to other doulas. So there's definitely a demand, and that demand is definitely growing.
And do you think part of their, we have this issue and sometimes in palliative care where specialists, where you're in a city, there are some strengths, but also some challenges. And same with more rural areas, there's certain different strengths and maybe different challenges. And so in Tasmania, you called it Tassie. I'm guessing it's not as city focused, although there probably are some cities. Do you think the movement, the receptivity is uh, easier to spread in maybe more in smaller communities than it is in, say, big cities with a big medical center?
100%,
Okay.
100%. And I think that the smaller communities and also the more rural communities are also more used to being on their own and fending for themselves
Yeah.
and being, resourceful and just making stuff work. And so doulas play a bigger part there. Having said that, some of the full-time work that's going on is going on in cities.
Yeah.
people
Okay.
in and out of cities. So, and I think, being on an island of 520,000 people or whatever it is that lives on this island, is a very different dynamic to, a city of a couple of million.
Fair.
The
Fair.
the
Yeah.
the fundings are different, and the I think in Hobart we probably have maybe 15 hospice palliative beds in our hospital system in southern Tasmania, and that is an area that services nearly 300,000 people.
Right.
So,
Not
like,
enough.
it's not enough, right?
Yeah.
So we're used to kind of looking for other options.
Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, when you mentioned about how some people I think you sort of said it, but you can self-bury, I guess. You wrap them in cloth and you bury them yourself without a coffin, I guess, is the way to do
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Especially
And we're doing that with people. Yeah, yeah, we're doing that with people. So burial on private land happens down here semi-regularly, and it's pretty easy in some council areas to get the permission to do that. And we help families shroud wrap their person, literally carry them to the grave and lay them in it.
yeah, interesting. Well, I mean, I'm curious, as you've been advocating, really for years and trying to share what you do and help people reimagine and redefine the funeral experience. In a way, there's some parallels to what we've been trying to do with Waiting Room Revolution and going upstream and showing people there's a different way. And like you said, you used the word informed consent earlier about making informed decisions. It's the same kind of thing as people travel their journey of like the knowledge they can have. And you mentioned it as a role. Sometimes people want to know what's next and how to prepare. So, yeah, I mean, if you've read our book, or what are your reactions to how this connects to some of the stuff you've been seeing in Australia?
Oh, I think it's really connected. I think it's that I want them to be intrinsically woven together. Like, the idea that people can have the autonomy and the agency to go, I'm going to know, I'm going to know as much as I can about what's going on in this body, and I'm going to be able to decide when I want active treatment, when I no longer want active treatment, and I'm going to be able to have those conversations with a language that I understand and that my people understand around me, and we're going to be able to, cry and laugh and decide when enough's enough, and I have the knowledge that will be respected, and I think there's a beautiful coming together, particularly between doula and palliative care, right?
Yeah.
I think there is an amazing way that those two services, those two groups of people can actually create a safety net to hold someone who's dying. Whether they're still receiving active treatment or not, there's a way that those two can be knitted together around all of the competing and changing things that are going on in the heart, the body, and the mind of a
Yeah.
person who's dying.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we've have tried to do is, as you know, we have our podcast and our book, but we have a workbook that just came out that has a free like workshop kit. And I have been thinking, we had the idea that we could see doulas using the materials from the workbook or the workshop, the slides or the exercises to be sort of a starting point of a curriculum, I guess, or some materials that they could embed in so that there's common language maybe. And I'm actually coming to Australia for the Ontario Oceanic Palliative Care Conference to share the workshop. But I'm just curious, I know you know a lot of the doulas around the country and probably you have a network around the world, really. Would something like that be useful or helpful for doulas? I know they all come with different expertise and experience. Our workshop was really meant just as a scaffolding so that people could um, reach people earlier, but also infuse their own experiences and unique skills into it.
I think it's really, really useful. And because that's one of the things, like, people say, where doulas are concerned, you're non-medical and you don't have to have a medical background. but understanding a palliative journey, obviously, because you're dealing with people who are generally dying, is actually really beneficial. And so to be able to skill doulas with that sort of commonality of language and understanding, and for them to be able to pass that on, that's a great entry level way
Mhm.
in to a community. And the amount of doulas is growing every year, the amount of doulas who complete a training or do a course or whatever. There's more and more and more every year, and they're all looking for ways into the community. So one of the drawbacks to doula training at the moment in Australia is that they don't provide what it is in your place. And because everything's so disparate, it's very different from state to state, right? And so they'll do a national training, but they won't tell you how to do a power of attorney or an advanced care directive in Western Australia as opposed to Queensland, as a like. So the a doula does training, but then also needs another level of education to go and interact and help people in community. And so something like what you're offering would actually be beneficial, and one of the strings to the bow. Like a doula
Yes,
could take that and go and do a community information session at a senior citizens center. Or
exactly.
yeah, I think that's really a beautiful idea.
Yeah, because I mean, our whole, I think everyone in this sort of field and sort of against the grain of fighting the negative stereotypes or impressions about what is dying and death and this desire to reimagine. And our revolution was really about the language, the changes in language about how we could frame it to the public so that they could not be scared and frightened. And I'm sure that's true for doulas. I know it is in Canada and the US and the UK, etc., that people think an end-of-life doula is really going to help them. I don't know what they think, but they may not appreciate the beauty that after people meet you, say, they probably say, I wish I had, contacted you sooner.
Yeah.
Um, but so the revolution, the keys, and the workshop is really about offering, in a way, it's like teaching people the skills for how they can interact with a complex system. Even if death isn't imminent, they still want to know how to prepare for the natural changes that are going to happen in any illness. Um, and the more that they know, the more they can, make use of the time they have. So yeah, we're excited to launch that, and actually we did a global launch in June. It just came out, and we had people from Australia waking up in the wee hours of the morning to learn about this new workshop kit. So yeah, I'm excited to present that at the conference in September in Brisbane, um, but obviously beyond that there'll be other opportunities. But yeah, I think it's great that there is a doula community and would love to connect with them.
Yeah, let's hook you up because
Yeah,
they would
we'll
love it.
connect with
They
them.
would absolutely love it.
Yeah. The doulas are one piece. You also do the like Natural Death Advocacy Network and Home Funeral Alliance. I mean, I don't know how you have time to do all these leadership things and traveling, but how are those, two groups the same or different? Because I'm just trying to understand a little bit. Like Home Funeral Alliance, I'm guessing maybe represents funeral directors, maybe? And
Yeah,
yeah.
they dovetail, but they're very, very different. So the Natural Death Advocacy Network was started 10 years ago by Dr. Pia Interlandi, who had come back from the UK and went, why aren't we doing natural burial in Australia? And so she started the NDAN, we call it, Natural Death Advocacy Network, but she started NDAN to really start promoting the conversations around natural burial. So
Okay.
that has, I came into that, I took over from her in 2020, I think it was. And the idea being that NDAN really looks at environmentally friendly, lower footprint body disposal methods. So our remit is very much natural burial. We talk about alkaline hydrolysis. We're involved with some of the advocacy around the natural organic reduction, human composting. So that is NDAN. The Australian Home Funeral Alliance was formed. I put those people in that room together on the back of the Churchill. So the report recommendations from the Churchill, I think the 13 recommendations, and I looked at them and went, what's the biggest bang for your buck?
Mm,
And that was getting people from at that stage around the world, different countries together to put something like a peak body, like an advocacy group together, looking at home funeral, trying to address funeral poverty, trying to
mm,
empower people to care for the dead themselves, and avoid the $10,000 bills and all that sort of stuff, because that was a gap that I really picked up on in the research. And so ARFA, we call it, because everything in Australia gets shortened, right? So ARFA is about empowerment and education and families caring for their people themselves in whatever capacity that happens to be, usually home funeral, with the understanding that home isn't always where you live.
yes, yes. You used two terms that I think are I would love to unpack a little bit. The first one was death composting. So I think I might have missed that. What is
Oh,
that?
human composting.
Yes, yes, sorry, that's what I meant. Human composting. So how does that work?
So there's various ways it's being done across the states in America at the moment, but basically the body goes into a vessel. That vessel is often, but not always, heat controlled,
Yeah.
temperature controlled. Over the space of time, there is water added to that, and there's a bacteria mixture that goes into that as well.
Okay.
And there's a rotation. And then, in one of the versions, it's about 30 days, and everything in the body is reduced to like a soil like substance. Obviously, there's some bone remain
Sure.
that gets crushed, and then anything artificial gets taken out, like hips and knees and things
Sure.
like that. But then that compost mixture of soil then can be put on a garden.
Wow, that's super interesting. And yeah, going back to the lower footprint, right, where there's natural ways. So how so interesting. Okay, and the other term you used was funeral poverty, which is
Yeah.
it's probably second nature to you, but the term just stuck out to me. But which obviously I'm guessing refers to people who who cannot afford the expenses around a say a traditional or what someone might think is a traditional funeral. So what are the options for them if or what are some of the options and different things they might do so that it could be lower cost?
It's really, yeah, it's a growing problem. I think I first heard the term funeral poverty in maybe 2017, so it's been around for a while, but it's this idea that we are pricing people out of funeral. And, every year the costs go up. There are people who are now drawing on super, who are extending mortgages, who are taking out loans, who are doing all this financial burden stuff to pay for a funeral because they feel like they have to. And then and what the other part of that is, we're positioning people to make decisions that are economic, not emotional. And
Mm-hmm.
economic decisions don't always support someone's heart or their grief and bereavement. So people are choosing cremation, for example, when they might have preferred burial, but a burial plot in some places is 10 grand on its own before you have a funeral. So that we're kind of positioning people to have to make these economic or not have a funeral at all. And as I said earlier, the ceremony and ritual is actually really important. And so ways that people can come around that, and people are coming around that, if cremation is the choice, then what the industry calls a DC, like a direct committal, or a NSNA, no service, no attendance. So they're the two terms that gets used in Australia. But people are having these kind of direct cremations,
Mm-hmm.
but then doing things themselves. Because
Mm-hmm.
the reality is you don't need a funeral director for a ceremony.
Yeah.
You can do things yourself if you're aware. You can organize a cremation yourself in some places. You can, do all the bits and pieces. But even if you know none of that, you can just get a cremation at a funeral home and then do ceremony yourself. Have a gathering, you know, swim out into the ocean and scatter someone's ashes.
Yeah.
Go for a bushwalk. I had a beautiful family who the funeral was a bushwalk because that's what mum did. She loved bushwalking. So all the friends gathered and they went on a bushwalk and had a picnic, and that was a funeral.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you don't need a funeral director for any of that. So I really encourage people to do the thing that is authentic and meaningful to the person who's died. Do the thing that's going to hold you. It doesn't have to be the big, fancy, expensive ceremony. But the other part of that we're looking at is natural burial. So, there are places now, when the cost of a natural burial plot equals roughly the cost of a cremation fee. The cost of grave digging equals roughly the cost of a mid-range coffin. And
Mm-hmm.
so what you then do is equalize things a little bit so that people can make a heart choice. Like if a coffin and cremation, because we also do shrouded cremations as well here, so coffin's not a legal requirement, but we kind of try and make it a little bit even so people have more option to
Mm-hmm.
go, what does my heart want, what did that person want, what is the best thing for us as a community or family, not what's the only thing we can afford.
Yeah, yeah. This is, as you were talking, if you do a natural burial where they are covered in shroud, as you said, do they still have to dig 6 feet, or it doesn't have to be so deep?
No, natural burials are shallow depth graves and they're single graves. So you're only going down about 1.2 meters because you need roughly a meter from the top of the body to the top of the earth. So you're in those aerobic layers of the soil where decomposition, where the nutrients in the body can go back into the earth around you.
Right.
Because once you're 6 foot under, you're below those aerobic layers and you're skeletonizing if you're not in a
Yeah.
plastic lined coffin,
Yeah.
because that's just creating human soup, which is pretty gross. So you're actually allowing the body to decompose into the earth, and the nutrients get reabsorbed into those aerobic layers of the soil.
Right. Otherwise, you're in this coffin that is really just preserving your body, like you said, for for a very
Well,
long.
it's not actually preserving the body. The body's still going to decompose, but it's going to decompose wrapped in a plastic thing that is not going to be useful to anyone.
Yeah. Um, the if there was, I guess we've talked a lot about some of the misconceptions people have, and um, what are your thoughts about what you wish you people knew more about? Um, Maybe not so much the funeral, but about dying and death. How one approaches that. Like, what's your advice from everything you've seen about um, what you wish people knew?
I wish people knew that they could take the time, that when someone is in those imminent stages of dying, like the active dying, that and even just leading up to that, but that's time you never get back.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to run around and do all these things and get prepared. You can just sit in that moment and everything else can wait, because what the knowledge that you gave that 100% of your attention will help you later. And it's the same, when someone dies, you never get that time back. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to be on the phone 5 seconds after the last breath calling people. You can just sit. You can have a cup of tea. You can cry and scream and laugh and watch an episode of your favorite show, whatever. Like, you can take time.
Mm-hmm. And just be with.
Yeah, just be in it.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you make that call, when someone dies, if they're at home and you make that call and you're not planning on keeping the person there, so that's the other thing I wish people knew. I wish people knew that the person is always theirs.
Mm,
Even if you call a funeral director and they come and collect the person, they're still your person. You still get to say where they go, what happens to them, when you want to spend time with, like, they're still your person.
mm. I love that. As you were talking, I wonder if because so many, we've medicalized dying and death, we've dentalized the death. People die in hospitals and 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 so, to your point, there isn't that feeling of you can just take the time because they want to move the body to the morgue and clean the bed for the next, patient who needs it, which I understand. But, we've lost that the home funeral, as you talked about, and people dying in home, or it's not as common. And that whole idea of the family taking the ritual of what to do with that body and doing that. So I think along with the medicalization, we have lost the rituals around natural dying and natural
Yeah.
funerals and natural home funerals, really, is what you're talking about. And I've seen people, I know, people in my family have died at home, and it was calm. And we were told you don't, take the time with the body. And we stood around, my uncle, um, we all said a little prayer, or said some words. We were holding hands, and it was a group of 8 of us or so. But that did mean something. Like we didn't feel the rush. And then we
Yeah.
called and they came, and when it was slow and calm. Whereas my mom died in a hospital, and it wasn't, it just felt different. It had a different feel,
Yeah.
and it felt medicalized. And the bing, the curtains and the bed and the clothes that she wasn't wearing clothes. She was wearing a hospital gown, that kind of thing. It just
Mhm.
felt different, even though she died in the middle of the night and the person pronounced the body. But yeah, it didn't have that feeling of we could be with, and she belonged to us in a way. Yeah. So I appreciate that.
And this is the thing, like, I had a client probably 18 months ago, and her husband was not necessarily going to die. He'd gone in for an operation and there were complications, and a few days later he did die. But in that time, she was on the phone and I'd gone in to see them. And when he took his last breath, she shut the door in the hospital room and she said, "The next person that comes through there is my doula." And the doctors were like, we 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 need to pronounce and we need to do this. And she's like, "No." She just shut the door and she went, "You're not coming in until my doula gets here." And she knew how to be her own advocate. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, I walked through the door and did all the things. And but it was like, yeah, you can't. And even when my aunt was dying, so she had a fall in a nursing home,
Mm,
and they called the ambulance before they called us. They called the ambulance, they took her to hospital. We went to the hospital. It was quite clear that she was dying. She'd smashed her shoulder, her collarbone, and her body, she was 97. Her body had gone into shock and just never came out of shock, right? I
mm,
think she had one Panadol the whole 28 hours or something. She just never. And so she's lying in this hospital bed, and I'm like, right, we need to take her back to the nursing home. You need to discharge her.
right.
She's clearly not in pain, and this is not the place for her to die. She needs to be at home because the nursing home was her home. She needs to be at home, and because her sister, my grandmother, was in the next room, so they were together.
Yeah.
And I was like, she needs to be at home and she needs to be with my grandmother. And this is what we're doing. And I don't think they quite knew what to do with that, but they did discharge her the next morning and we took her home and she died at home in the nursing home with my grandmother holding her hand.
Mm,
Like, they're your people.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
they're your people.
And that's the life even in the face of death. Yeah, the living and
Yeah.
that. Um, Beck, it's been amazing talking to you. We like to end our interviews with talking about hope. And so what gives you hope, or what are you hoping for in the future?
I hope for a real rise in death literacy across the world. And I hope that brings an incredible amount of empowerment to people, because death is a part of life. And I think there's so much hope in how we can learn to show up for each other.
Well said. Thank you for being on our show today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Our workbook, Applying the 7 Keys for Navigating a Life-Changing Diagnosis, is available now at all online bookstores. Visit our website for more details and to access our free resources, event listings, and learn all about our movement. The best way to keep up with us and our work is to join our newsletter list, or better yet, become an ambassador. This episode was produced by Maggie Sivak, myself, Kayla McMillan, Shilpa Jyothi Kumar, Bethany Bachanfuso, and Kathleen Bartlett. Our theme music is Maypole by Ketsa.